the inability to get more recent data and to build more new data. Would you say that's predominantly because of government regulation and privacy? Is that, as we're seeing that, obviously, I think we really saw it after, I don't know, was it the 2016 election with data analytica and all that kind of stuff, and people started looking at it? Is that why it's so much harder to get that recency and build that new data is due to new government regulations? And, if so, how has government regulations made it more difficult to, collect and sell that third-party data?
For sure. That's a great question. It's kind of another trend. Probably it ties right into like, why are people asking the questions about quality and precision, whereas why were they not as focused on the questions previously, right? And it's definitely around privacy legislation, privacy questions, what Cambridge Analytica, coming in front of Congress, and just like Facebook being in front of Congress, like all those things definitely changed the mindset and enabled people to ask some of these really hard questions. But yeah, privacy legislation, which I would say really in the last, let's call it last 2 years, really, I think started to change things, right? So certainly under GDPR, which is much more comprehensive and much more conservative to a certain extent, and CCPA, as it rolled out in California, and as it impacted a number of other different state privacy legislation, things became a little more complicated, to put it lightly. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, is that this legislation focused on preventing the selling of data without consent, which pretty much makes it hard to sell data, right? Because if you're going to ask someone, "Hey, can I sell your data?" I mean, you're probably not going to get a yes in most cases, unless you're giving some really compelling value prop. So more or less, it is, even if it's not directly explicitly saying, it's saying you cannot really sell data anymore in the modern world, right? So when we talked about the history of third-party data, starting with email, they kept buying up all this data exhaust. They became this monster entity, right? One of their biggest strengths is to grow and keep collecting and getting more and more data. But if the selling of data becomes more complicated and arguably not even possible at maybe either at some point or someday, I think there's definitely a gray area in all of these things. Then how, if you're a third-party asset, what choices do you have, right? Like, how do you keep yourself resilient? Are you then shrinking over time? Which you could make a argument and have a constructive debate on that these assets could be shrinking in nature. And the reason is that the second and third thing a lot of this legislation has enabled is the right to opt out, right? And the right to have consent, and the right to have knowledge of how your data is being used. So if you can't buy any more data, and consumers are coming to you and saying, "Don't use my data, I want to know what you have on me, and opt me out or delete me completely from your system," then you could make the constructive kind of a dialogue around, "Hey, we might have something that is a shrinking asset," right? So that's some of the stuff that regulation and privacy legislation is also having some of these trends as well.